Hi Mandy, how are you?
Hi, Khalid. I'm very good, thank you. Yes, all is well.
Good, good. Glad to hear it.
Yeah, I've got a
We're
few
just
days
talking
to go,
today.
and then we've got that Scorpio
Yes,
full moon coming. But
yes,
I'll handle this over to you.
yes. And we also have my cat Luna. Oh, which is funny because her name is Moon in Latin, right?
Ah,
See her? Hi Luna, say
oh,
hello. Say hello to everyone. She likes to bury her head, you
oh,
know, everywhere. Anyway,
yes,
so so yeah, we're talking about the moon and the water signs, and
yes,
it's an appropriate time because the moon is entering Scorpio soon.
yes,
Um, and it feels for me like there's a nice kind of fit when you talk about the moon and the water signs,
definitely,
because
yeah.
the moon is very emotional
Mm-hmm.
in astrology, and we can see that just if we consider how quickly it moves through all of the signs, right? Just the fact that it completes its movement through an entire sign every 2.5 days, right?
Yes,
And so during its transit through every sign, it's supposed to absorb and reflect onto us the energy, the kind of archetype of that sign, you know?
yes,
So for one planet to be able to do that at such a fast pace, that means it would have to be especially flexible and changeable, right? And so I feel like that there's a natural association because of that, because of the pace of the moon's phases. There's a natural association between the moon and the element of water, right?
yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So so I guess we can start with the moon in Cancer, right?
Yeah, sorry, just picking up on what you've just said, and
Yeah.
that should be really obvious to everybody, whether they follow astrology or not, because of the tides.
Right.
Simple fact
Yes.
that it's the moon that causes the tides to go in and out.
Yep.
So nobody can kind of argue about the connection of the moon with water from
Right.
a very realistic earthly point of view.
Yes.
Sorry, I
And
interrupted you.
no, no, that's
No.
fine. I mean, there's also like, this this very old connection between the moon and female menstrual cycles as well.
Yes.
So there's this additional kind of layer of symbolism, which is interesting because it connects moon with femininity as well.
Yes.
Um, so yeah, that's a nice lead into moon in Cancer. Because the moon in Cancer, I would say the moon in Cancer uh, becomes, it kind of embodies, lives out the maternal archetype most clearly in that sign, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So in traditional astrology and in astrology today, the moon is considered the natural ruler of the sign in Cancer, of the sign of Cancer, which means that when it's moving in Cancer, um, it feels most at home. The energies of the sign really reflect and kind of stabilize. I shouldn't use stabilize the moon, but maybe place and comfort the moon's own um, energy pattern. Okay, so the intrinsic energy pattern of the moon fits in with the sign of Cancer more closely than it fits in with any other sign. Which means that if you are born when your moon is in Cancer, when the moon is in Cancer, um, I guess you could say that you will have a strong lunar personality, um, and because it is a lunar personality, uh, it would be a kind of, say, a layer of your personality or a facet of your personality that would take time for other people to actually perceive or sense, right? Because again, the moon, when it moves through any of the signs, it kind of materializes the energies of those signs um, on a level that is just below uh, conscious awareness. Okay,
All right.
it's a
Okay.
level that is more, more in line with instinct and habit. And so the energies then they kind of work to, they start to organize the way in which we go about fulfilling our basic needs for security and comfort and satisfaction, fulfillment, right? Um, and Cancer is a sign that is very much focused on um, kind of creating for the person a safe and familiar environment. Right?
Right.
So they feel like everything around them is, there wouldn't be an element of surprise and disturbance and a threat. That's very important for um, well, anyone with a strong signature of Cancer, right, in their chart.
I
That
think with the
mm,
Cancer element being cardinal
yeah,
water,
mm,
so I'm thinking the cardinals are all about beginnings.
mm,
So therefore, it makes sense to me that the Cancer is where our life begins. I mean, you could even go so far as sort of saying it begins in the mother's womb, which
mm-hmm,
is kind of like, why maybe the mother is sort of associated with
yeah,
the moon as well. But it is very much about childhood and how your life began. I
mm-hmm,
kind of see that to me is very much reflecting the cardinal water part of it. What do you
yeah,
think?
yeah. I'm really glad you mentioned that because there is a traditional kind of opinion that people with born with the moon in Cancer just become very attached to their own mothers, right? And at least speaking for myself, I think that is very, very, very true. And I would say the attachment does work on a very, very deep level, So I often find myself like gravitating towards my mother's company as if it's like a force pushing me towards her, you
And it's
know?
just instinctive.
And it really
Yeah.
is, really, really, really is,
I mean, this is a weird thing to say,
Mm,
but there are certain younger men who kind
mm,
of go for older women. And
mm.
I'm wondering whether they might have moon in
Oh,
Cancer. Just a
that is
thought.
interesting. That is interesting.
Yes,
That's something I
I've
would like
never
to
sort
do
of
research
thought
on.
about that before.
That's
But
something I'd like to do research on. Yeah, yeah. Um, so yeah, safety and familiarity are very important to Cancer.
Mhm.
Okay. Um, and I think in our last discussion, where we covered the sun and the moon and earth signs, we discussed what Taurus and Cancer share in terms of their focus. They're focused on security and familiarity. Um, and I want to reiterate something that I said then, which is that for the moon in Cancer, it's more about emotional familiarity and emotional security. Okay,
yeah,
feeling
yes,
emotionally
yes,
safe, you know?
yes.
Um, and so, okay, so Moon and Cancer people, they are they are okay, but the challenge they face is to really manage their environment in a way that makes them feel secure wherever they go, right? Um, and because it's a kind of it's operating from a very deep kind of heart level, um, they might be kind of maneuvering around people and situations in a way that gets them to that place of comfort. Okay, um, and that kind of process might involve some degree of quite sophisticated emotional manipulation, right? And I don't necessarily mean like exploitation. That's not what I'm going at, you know, but kind of, mm, you know, knowing what to say and how to say it, you know, and to whom and when, so that you get what you need to feel like you're, yeah, like you're safe and in within your comfort zone, you know. Um, so there is that dimension of Cancer, right, which is really strongly um, activated when the moon is in Cancer. Okay,
Mm.
and then there's another dimension which is being very open to other people's feelings and energies. Um, Speaking for myself, I feel that that dynamic has really played itself out very visibly, very strongly, very consequentially in my own life. You know, being open to other people's energies and moods and problems. You know, um, and a lot of the emotional complexity of Moon in Cancer
Yes.
comes from this, from what you mentioned, from it being a cardinal water sign.
Yeah.
So, and it's important to stress this point, you know, to kind of make the distinction between Moon and Pisces, which is the water, the mutable water sign. Um, so, cardinal water, the association between the Moon and cardinal water, explains why when the Moon is in Cancer, the Moon in Cancer people, they find themselves kind of actually moving toward um, you know, areas that are of life that are saturated with emotion, right? There is that hunger to live life in a very emotional way. Okay, so there's a part of them, you know, and they can be conscious of it to varying degrees, but if it's Moon in Cancer, it's just instinct, right? There's that part of them that just drives them, for example, to watch like really sad films or listen to really sad music, you know,
Ah, okay.
or to really listen attentively and with a lot of empathy uh, to other people, you know, when they're sharing personal experiences with them, you know. And that's also what leads them to kind of lose themselves a bit in the emotional experiences and environments that are outside them, whether they're coming from other people or like virtually, you know, through a film, through a painting, through a song, through a novel, through a poem, you know. It kind of they get energized by absorbing that emotional intensity and kind of experiencing it as if it's their own, right?
An
Um,
empath.
and yeah, I get that's a really good word I feel to use with Moon and Cancer. You know, it's not about like it's not that they don't have a sense of their own identity, so they have to go searching, you know, for their identity in other places. It's a bit more subtle and tricky than that. It's like their identity itself uh, gains power by being able hmm, by being able to absorb and assimilate different types of feelings, you know. to kind of master the language of feelings, right? That makes a Cancer person, a Moon in Cancer person, feel particularly empowered, I would say.
Do
Yeah.
you think the moon in Cancer, particularly A, because it's cardinal, and B, because the moon rules Cancer, is going to be the most sensitive of the three water signs to the phases of the transiting moon, meaning the moon in the sky affecting someone whose moon was in the sign of Cancer at the time that they were born? So
Yes.
that makes it their moon, but obviously the moon in the sky is doing its circuit, you know, every single month, and during that month it will pass through all of the 12 signs, and some of those signs will maybe trigger that the individual person's moon in a very emotional way, and others of those signs may just affect their moods. I think the moon in the sky can affect everybody's moods, but I don't know whether Cancer would be more sensitive to it than any of the other signs. What do you think?
I mean, it sounds like a logical conclusion to make. I haven't, but maybe I will actually, because I think it would be really interesting and useful to do so. I've never made an effort to correlate, my mood to.
Well, yeah, because the moon would be a subconscious thing anyway, so you wouldn't. So to consciously do it would have to be a kind of like a decision to sort of monitor it, really, wouldn't it?
Yes, it would have to be a decision, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. But okay, so but I would still lean toward this idea, which is that even when the moon is transiting through the different signs,
yeah,
that wouldn't necessarily, debilitate a moon in Cancer person, because having the moon in Cancer allows you to kind of hold in these feelings, and somehow kind of get satisfaction from being in these different kind of feeling zones, you know. And I remember that, growing up. I mean, well, I say growing up, this is true even now, you know. You know, it would be like very okay. When I read a fantasy novel, I'd enter that world, and it would be a world completely different from this gravity tide world we live in, and I just absorb it in a way that would make me feel like this world that's just coming out of, a bunch of letters on pages is actually around me, you know.
yeah,
And I feel like also having displacement is what makes me, like, when I listen to the type of music I like, right? Um, and that's not to say there's just one type. It could be many types. But when I listen to a piece of music, I kind of instinctively turn the melody into an expression of whatever it is I perceive to be my kind of emotional situation or challenge or phase at the time. I just automatically personalize whatever I'm experiencing.
that
Even though, like,
must be
the
nice.
lyrics might have nothing
Yeah,
to do at all with what I'm feeling, but
yeah. No, that
I just
must be. That must actually I mean, you can't say anything is all good and anything else is all bad, but to be
yeah
able to emotionally engage, and it must be really nice to be able to easily do that,
yeah
because I've got a Gemini moon, which
mm,
I've talked about many times, but air signs are much more detached, and
yeah
I do engage emotionally. I think it probably takes quite a bit more. I kind of like tend to sort of analyze things,
Yeah.
rather, and there's nothing more pleasurable than when something absolutely just kind of touches my emotions, and there's no getting away from the fact that that's what's happened, and it's like, oh, I feel alive all of a sudden.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't say that that happens to me in the way that you're describing it, which sounds like it's quite a sort of constant thing.
It really is. Like, what am I? I'm
Nice.
30, I'm 37 now, right? And the way I engage with a sad film or sad piece of animation, for example, like as I'm watching, if I get to a critical point, right, in this visual narrative, right, um, very often I can't stop myself. You
Right.
know, I can I can sense that the wave, right,
Yes.
that the tide is coming, it's surging out, and I won't be able to stop it, like unless I get up and move, But often, like,
Mm.
the conscious part of my mind will be observing what's going on, and they'd be like, okay, this is sad. Why? Why are you, immersing yourself in this experience if it's so sad? Why are you doing that?
Right.
But in spite of that, I'll just stick where I am and just let it just come in. And in a very odd way, it's just very difficult to explain. Uh, I guess I just feel like I get a kind of satisfaction that makes me feel like hmm, oh, okay. It's kind of like an actual hunger. Like it's kind of like I'm consuming something I need to consume, right?
Okay.
It's like emotional food, I guess you could say, right? And it's very confusing because in the end, I'm aware that these are experiences of other people, and kind of internalizing these experiences. This is
Yeah.
exactly the point. Internalizing these experiences does not necessarily mean that I would push myself outside of my comfort zone, right? To go kind of deal with this situation that I'm seeing that I feel like is so troubling, you know? This is where paradox comes
It's
in.
really interesting that you're saying that, because I mean, obviously, the news, things that are happening in the news. I mean, most of the news is about horrible things. I'm not saying they never sort of report on anything that's good or celebratory, but there's a lot of kind of wars and troubles and things like that reported in the news every day, and some terrible things.
Yeah.
Whether they're global or whether that have happened to individual people. And I've got to say, most things in the news, even if they're really terrible, I will recognize them as being terrible, and I will be very sympathetic, and I will kind of, and I'll understand, and I will believe that that is awful, and I just think that poor person, blah blah blah. But do I take that on board myself? Very, very rarely will that actually deeply affect me emotionally.
I
And
see.
I'm just wondering, do you know, I mean, I'd be worried if everything that was bad that was happening to everybody was affecting me emotionally, because I think that would drive you mad. But I don't know. I mean, as a cancer person, how many things that are nothing to do with you personally, but things that happen in the news, actually affect you?
All the time.
Oh gosh.
All the time.
Oh, that must be hard. Unless I'm just this hard, horrible person, which I don't think I am. I realise these things are awful, and I've had sort of, I've done things like, I don't know, when there's been like disasters, like earthquakes in certain places, I've sent them money, blah, 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 because I just think that's terrible, awful. But I'm not, I am still sort of, in a healthy kind of way, detached from it.
Yeah.
If that makes
No, it's
sense.
very, if it's any situation that involves suffering, abuse, you know, oppression, I just can't block it. Well, the only way I can block it is to actually disengage from it. Like if it's
Right.
a piece of news, not read it. If it's
Yeah.
television, not see it. If it's
I mean, I have had things like that, but that's quite rare. That is quite rare. Moving on to Scorpio then.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, maybe I'm thinking about some of the issues that we kind of mentioned for the Cancer. How would this all translate for Scorpio? Because we're going a very, very different way with Scorpio.
Yes.
Oh, yeah, explain.
Right.
Explain why.
So to kind of get an understanding of why, so the moon is considered to be in the least comfortable place in Scorpio, okay? First, we have to recall that it is, as the traditional astrologer said, you know, exalted, right, well placed in Taurus. And
it's exalted in Taurus, yes.
Right. Taurus is a fixed earth sign.
Yes.
And Scorpio is the fixed water sign that lies opposite to Taurus in the chart. So traditionally, the perception is that there is a fundamentally kind of opposite way in which these energy archetypes work, Taurus and Scorpio. Okay?
Right.
Now, Scorpio, I mean, if you go and just, you know, search online for like the typical characteristics of someone with a sun in Scorpio, okay, you'll find in most places that you'll reach, you'll find that Scorpio people are described as very emotionally driven, okay, and ambitious. That they're very, very intuitive and emotionally perceptive, okay, but in a way that kind of helps them externalize their own power, right? Externalize their own
this is
power.
the sun in Scorpio.
Right, this is the sun in Scorpio.
Right, okay.
So that helps them to kind of externalize their power, and through emotional manipulation also, and through emotional reserve, by kind of concealing what they're feeling, you know, they're oriented toward gaining power over their environment, and that's a very different thing from security. You need to make the distinction between power and security. Very, very different thing. So whereas a moon and Cancer person would typically be just kind of focused inwards, right? A moon and Scorpio person, they would probably find themselves kind of laden, just kind of like, I don't want to say buried under, but kind of shouldered with all the emotional depth and complexity that Scorpio comes with, right? But because that depth is so intense and the layers are so complex, and because there's this push to get them out, the moon sort of feels a bit trapped, and I would say maybe a bit suffocated there, you know, because that kind of, when water is in that kind of fixed mode, I would say it needs more of an outlet, right? A more active kind of.
So
yeah,
you're saying, because it's fixed, you're saying it's not flowing.
Yeah, it's kind of, you're talking about like layers of really intense emotions piling up on each other, you know?
Yes.
And just getting, you can think of it as a kind of like a river rising and then getting dammed and just kind of constantly pushing against the dam, you know? And if we just think about the planet Mars, right? It's like the planet of, you know, aggression, and
War.
initiative, war, conflict, etc., right? Mars is considered to be the natural ruler of Scorpio,
Mm-hmm.
astrology and modern as well now. And the difference between its rulership over the sign of Aries, which is cardinal fire, and the sign of Scorpio, which is fixed water, is that in Scorpio it works in a more indirect way, right? It expresses its will. It's very important for Mars to express its will to get what it wants done, right? But it does it in a more, a more kind of circuitous, is that the word I'm looking for? Yeah, it's a
Say
kind of
that again.
roundabout kind of way, right? Um, so there is a level of kind of manipulation of the environment, but that is more with Moon and Scorpio. That is more about kind of calculation, and guarding your feelings so that you're not in a position of disadvantage, um, in terms of power, like with other people. And that's also because Scorpio is very much a sign oriented toward power, right? And this is where its more modern connection, its symbolic connection with the planet Pluto lies, right? Pluto is seen as like you know, the lord of the underworld, so it's always the power hungry planet, right? On an epic scale. And so it,
Dog.
that kind of mythological background really helps us understand why it's associated with the sign of Scorpio, and it would also help us understand why the moon in Scorpio would feel uncomfortable, because ultimately, I mean, the moon can absorb an intense amount of emotion, but its focus is on doing that to kind of enrich itself, you know, not to project itself out in the world, right? And actively engage with others in a to kind of let's say, I mean, imagine life as a kind of story, right? The moon doesn't necessarily want to be the main protagonist in the story, right? If
Yeah.
the story is populated by protagonists who are the main, like the planets, let's say, it's not the moon's ambition to be in the center of the story. You know, that is how I understand the moon, right? Um, it's much more comfortable just kind of maybe sitting in the background, right? Receiving the energies from the different actors in the plot, right? And enriching itself in that way. It's less comfortable kind of pushing itself into the story and taking the limelight, being in the limelight, you know. So yeah, I would imagine like a moon in Scorpio person would struggle with feeling like, first of all, like they're trying to sort through their very complex emotional world, and at the same time they feel threatened by that world's complexity more than a moon and Cancer person would be, because there's still that scorpionic focus on maintaining control. Here's the control over the self, right?
Mm.
Control.
My son has got a
Mm.
moon in Cancer, and I have to
Moon
say,
doesn't
not
it
in
mean
Cancer,
Scorpio? Right.
no, in moon in Scorpio. Sorry,
Right.
he
Yeah.
has a moon in Scorpio, and I have to say he doesn't often display emotions. I'm not saying he seems emotionless. He's got a very kind of outgoing personality, and you know, also, but you rarely get outbursts of emotion with him. You know, it's my daughter, who is a Cancer sun, so her moon isn't there. She's very obviously outwardly emotional, but he, no, it's all very well controlled. So it's not saying he's emotionless, but it's very, very kind of private, that side of things. Well, from where I'm standing anyway. Interesting. I do think
I know quite a few people with their suns in Scorpio, and I'm always struck by the level of emotional reserve. You know, it often gets to the point where I feel like, I mean, how much time do I have to spend with you so that you'd be comfortable enough to just open up and show me what you're feeling? Because I'm not convinced that you are neutral most of the time. No one is neutral most of the time. No one is serene most of the time.
What about shyness? Do you think a moon in Scorpio person might actually be quite shy, and that's why their emotions are hidden? You know, because like, some people are not, you know, showing their emotions is really quite a difficult thing for them. It doesn't feel natural for them to kind of make emotional displays.
I think they might be shy, you know, especially.
I mean, because the word you used earlier on is it's in full in Scorpio. Like the moon in Scorpio is uncomfortable. That's right. And I would connect that with possible shyness in certain situations.
Right, that makes sense. And also, I would say there might be a kind of vigilance, a kind of, and this is where paradoxically I think that placement, moon in Scorpio, it would make their minds more actually emotionally alert, right? There would be a vigilance over expressing how they're feeling, because most likely for a moon in Scorpio person, even more than a sun in Scorpio, expressing vulnerable feelings like fear, like shame, would make them feel just, you know, too threatened, you know, too disadvantaged, you know, because power is important to them, you know.
Yes, and maybe there is an exaggeration there because it's fixed and it's held onto and it's deeply buried. They may feel a bit embarrassed about something, which another person might feel embarrassed and then just kind of let it go and let it out. But they would hold on to that, and that embarrassment would turn into maybe shame or guilt, or become something much too huge, you know, for what it deserves to be. Possibly. I don't know. I mean, I just feel that if you have got someone who is blowing out of some sort of proportion and emotion and making too much of it for their own good, I'm kind of inclined to think that a Scorpio moon is a quite likely place where that might happen.
Yes, absolutely.
That's not necessarily saying that will always happen to all people that have a Scorpio moon, but it might be a tendency.
Yes.
Because it is uncomfortable there to start with.
Yeah. Because in spite of, you know, water being an element sign, you know, when it's fixed in Scorpio, it gains a certain drive that is extroverted. It's kind of like it wants to accomplish something out in the world, and it wants to be recognized, you know. So it just makes sense, kind of like in terms of the symbolic schemes of astrology. It makes sense why the moon would be uncomfortable there, you know. As the moon doesn't find her fulfillment in.
I'm just feeling how, as I say, like I don't have a water moon, so
Mm,
I'm having to sort of guess what this all feels like. But I'm feeling like with the Cancer being so receptive to all emotions, yeah, that are not even your own kind of thing, must be very difficult sometimes. And I'm feeling with the Scorpio moon, it's kind of like those buried emotions and those kind of like clinging on, and it must be really hard for people with the Scorpio moon to let things go. I would imagine they can hold on to things for years that should be long gone and let go of. And also, you know, they may come across as being a bit emotionless, but I don't think so. I think it's just buried. And
yeah,
I would hate to be a person where emotionally, constantly things are just not flowing. And I feel that imagery with fixed water. It is water that is sort of stagnant and not flowing
yes,
unless you warm it up to get it flowing.
yes,
I don't
yes.
know.
It's a
It's just
beautiful
my,
analogy. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting. Do you
It
want to
is,
talk
it
about the
is,
Pisces moon then? Let's see if we can
yeah.
pull them to pieces as well.
Just one more
Yeah.
point, because you brought this point, this point about kind of bearing grudges, right? Both Moon and Cancer also is known, well, I mean, Cancer in general is known also as a sign that nurses grudges pretty well, you know?
Oh, okay.
And we can understand that in kind of different ways, right? In the case of Cancer and Scorpio. So a Cancer would tend to hold a grudge because um, it's a kind of emotional receptivity makes it kind of easily, it's vulnerable and it's easy to wound, but it doesn't like to be, and as no one likes to be wounded, obviously, right? um, so part of their coping mechanism is to withdraw and remember that kind of those incidents of emotional wounding, and remember them, so that they have a defense mechanism in case they run into them in the future, right? And because their security is so important for them, um, if they feel kind of wounded enough, they will step out of their comfort zone, which is which is more about kind of keeping yourself actually safe from harm, right? So safe from what might emerge from a direct confrontation. So they'll step into a direct confrontation at that point, and then the crab's claws will come out. Okay. With the Scorpio energy, if it gets uh, injured in any way, like from the outside, that would be translated as a kind of a challenge to the Scorpion's power, right? And so there's an ego element involved, I would
Okay.
say, more than in the case of the Cancer, right?
Okay.
So because you've bruised my ego, uh, I am going to take vengeance on you, right? So
But the Scorpio energy is clearly much more spiteful, where the Cancers is more self-protective, whereas the
yes,
Scorpio revenge, all that sort of thing, possibly.
yeah, like more actively retaliatory, I would say.
Yeah.
And the Cancer is more passively retaliatory, you know.
Mm.
Um, but yeah, if I would say, if if it's possible that if you get someone with a very Cancerian personality, I mean, maybe someone with many planets in Cancer, for example, if you get such a person roused, um, yeah, that kind of snap that you'll get is something that you might never forget, you know? And the same goes with Scorpio, you know? It's
Which
just
I would say the Cancer one is more likely to have a tantrum.
a tantrum. Mm.
An emotional outburst, a tantrum, act like a baby, whatever.
Yeah.
Whereas I think the Scorpio will be much more calculated about their how they'll retaliate.
Yeah.
I think there'll be something more spontaneous about the Cancer person's reaction than the Scorpio. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
Okay.
All right.
Go on then.
Yeah.
Pisces.
So
Give me
Pisces.
Pisces.
Yeah. I would say
It's the only one where the moon is kind of, it's neither, you know, ruling it. There's no, or it's not it has no classification in Pisces. It has it. It's just a water sign.
yeah. I would say we already know that Sun and Pisces people are quite mysterious, possibly the most mysterious of all the sun signs. If we just consider people, let's say, for the sake of the discussion, just as sun signs, right? I would say Moon and Pisces people would be even more mysterious, at least to themselves. They would be more mysterious to themselves, right? So they would have the same drive as a Sun and Pisces person, the same drive to kind of really create your identity as opposed to enrich it in the case of Cancer. Create your identity through emotional engagement and immersion with different emotional landscapes, right?
Well, just to remind people that the Pisces water sign is the mutable version of water. So it's where the water is really flowing, but not in any particular direction. Yeah.
So yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that. It's relevant here because the moon already is quite changeable, right?
Yes.
It's already quite changeable. So being in the sign of Pisces makes it even more so, right? So I would imagine that having your moon in Pisces, you'd find yourself often really struggling to get a hold of who you are, you know? Like identifying where certain situations, certain people, certain stories, to the point that they become your own, but then you get kind of, you might get kind of actually confused and lost about.
Yeah, maybe like one minute you think you really like something, and then and you you think, oh, I'm loving this strawberry flavored ice cream, and then the next day it's, oh, this is disgusting. Oh no.
Yeah.
And you forget that you even kind of liked it the day before.
Yes.
It just has that sort of feel to it, like a moon in Pisces.
Yes. So it's kind of like a changeability that is like particularly, it might come across as really irrational and unpredictable, you know? It's like, okay, why do you feel like doing this now when just a few minutes ago you said you felt like doing this, you know? But also when I think about Moon and Pisces, I just see a person kind of moving through life with a very, very porous, very open kind of let's say inner personality. And
do you know how I see it? Sorry to interrupt you, but you know, like sometimes you have a dream, and in the dream something seems like a really good idea, and you kind of like feel, oh, you're aware it's a dream for some reason, and you think, oh my God, in the morning, I must kind of write this down. I must do something about this. This is a brilliant idea. And then you wake up in the morning and it's just stupid. But I would imagine they are like that a lot of the time without it having to be happening in a dream or in the middle of the night. They are just kind of like that a lot.
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt. It just kind of...
No, that's fine. That's fine. I mean, it's just like the image I get in my head when I think of a moon Pisces person is someone just kind of like walking, let's say, walking through a tunnel that's got many different, very, very different types of murals on it, okay, on the walls of the tunnel. And the tunnel is very well lit. And as they're walking through this tunnel, they're looking at everything. And whatever they look at, they become that at the time. but then, you know, and it's like, you know, they turn and be like, oh,
it sounds a bit trippy.
I see myself here. And then they walk and they see another totally different type of mural, and they're, oh no, but I think I'm more like that, you know?
Do you actually think it is possibly a little bit like being on some sort of like drug without actually needing to be on the drug?
Yes. Because I know like I know some Pisces people who have such a wide range of interests that to the point where I start like thinking about it, questioning I mean kind of trying to understand in my mind the mindset that you need to have to actually be able to be interested in such a wide variety of things, you know?
Yeah.
And the only conclusion I can come up with is like you have to like really porous, right? In a way that kind of in a way that leads you to your identity itself actually being very hard to define and very slippery, you know? And so I feel when Pisces people, that kind of scenario would be unfolding regardless of what, let's say, what life experiences they decide to commit their energy to, right? It's not, I feel like it's not necessarily the case that they will push themselves to become fluent in many different languages or specialize in different fields or work in many different types of jobs. That's not, I don't get that image in my mind. But I feel like as they move through life, they're very likely to kind of identify with so many different things to the point where it'll be a real challenge for them to figure out who they are.
I think a moon in Pisces, probably of the three, maybe I'm talking out of my, maybe I'm wrong here, but I think a moon in Pisces person may seriously need to look at the rest of their chart in order to sort of like find their kind of focus place.
Yes.
So that it can be controlled in a kind of like a very useful way.
Yes. I would agree.
And it may be more exaggerated with some people than others, depending on perhaps which house it's in and what it's connecting with. But it may be quite difficult. It may be quite a difficult thing being a moon in Pisces person taken out of context.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, if you had, I know you are a Cancer moon, so maybe you're the wrong person to ask this question to, because I was going to say, if you had to be a moon in one of those three signs, which would be your preference? I'm thinking maybe I'd be a better person to answer that, as my moon is not only not in a water sign, but I'm in an air sign. I'm in a masculine sign. So of the three, probably Scorpio, actually, funnily enough.
You would like to be Scorpio?
I'm just thinking, because I'm used to being a Gemini moon,
Okay.
I don't know, maybe I would prefer to be a Scorpio moon of the three.
Interesting.
um because I feel that's possibly the one that has the most control. Maybe that's why I'm choosing it. I don't know.
Control.
I don't know. I'm actually glad I'm not a water moon, even though it seems a very natural place for a moon sign to be.
Mm.
I think I'll stick with my Gemini moon. Thank you very much.
Well, you have Sun in Aquarius too, so air, I feel like complements air, you know?
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, and you have,
I think of all the moons that we have discussed over the last kind of couple of, days, whatever, the one, if I could choose my moon, I'd go for the Taurus moon. I think it's awesome, actually.
I was just thinking that actually.
I definitely think the moon exalted in Taurus. I see the value of the word exalted as opposed to ruling. I feel that's a fabulous place to have your moon.
Mm.
I would swap my Gemini moon for a Taurus moon. Yes, I would.
I think it would certainly, give you a kind of a natural kind of comfortableness. You're just kind of comfortable in
Yeah,
your own skin, you know?
yeah,
That's a
yeah.
huge advantage, I think, honestly.
I
Like
think that would be lovely.
I would still stick with my moon in Cancer because I do like mystery and I do like complexity, you know, and I do feel enriched by different kind of emotional states. Um, but then again, that just maybe, my moon in Cancer itself speaking, like like why would I want to be anything else, you know? But this is something like I feel like it's important also to add to qualify this whole question. Um, we need to think about how the elements of the sun sign also work with the elements of the moon sign and also the rising sign, which just complicates things more, you know? Because I feel like water works better with earth and fire works better with air, you know?
Yeah.
Um, water might get too watery, fire and fire might get too fiery, you know? I
Oh,
feel like,
okay. So
you know what I'm
you would
saying?
actually you'd prefer it
Mhm.
with its complementary element rather than its own element.
I imagine that the
Mm.
mixture ultimately would be more stable, uh,
Well,
more comfortable at least,
well, that's interesting that you say that because I mean this may go over some people's heads that are listening to this, but if you've got a planet that is a trine with another planet, meaning it is in the same element. It is in the same element, but it's not in the same sign. So, it might be that your sun is in, let's say, Taurus, which is an earth sign, and your moon is in Virgo. So they're in the same element, but not the same sign. That would be considered very harmonious, wouldn't it?
yes.
To have those two. Whereas if you had your sun in Taurus and your moon also in Taurus, which would be a conjunct,
Mm.
that can sometimes be considered as a bit of a clash.
Hmm.
I mean, it can be considered a very good thing, don't get me wrong, but sometimes too much of the same, like you're saying.
Yeah,
So even though the trine is still the same element to element,
yeah,
that would be classed as harmonious, wouldn't it?
right. And it's like it's a good it's good to I think to kind of strike this analogy between different planets having a happy relationship when they're in the same sign. Like we can compare that to different people, different individuals being comfortable with each other because they have to some extent a similar nature.
Yeah.
But if you have too much of, if you as one individual have, double the measure of the same nature in yourself, that might end up kind of leading to an
Just too
imbalance.
much. It could
You
just,
know?
yeah,
Yeah.
it's like too much sugar in the cake.
Yes. Yeah. So
Interesting. That's another
yeah,
conversation, I think, for
yeah, yeah.
another day. But yeah, good. Thank you. That was
No,
so
thank you.
cool.
Thank
Really
you.
enjoyed talking about the moon in
That
the
was
water
really
signs.
fun.
All right. Take care, Khalid.
You as well. Until next time.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.